Welcome, Sens Talk.
Here comes Smith with a pass across. Oh, he scores! He bats it in! Tim Stutzer wins it for Ottawa. Triple Grant is going to put the finishing touches on an Ottawa win. Oh! See you later. Go Sens, go!
All right, welcome back to Sens Talk. I am Brandon Plant, and I am joined here with friend of the show and Sportsnet's writer, Alex Adams. Alex, long overdue. So fired up to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, Brandon. I'm excited to talk some Senators. It's been a interesting first 11 games to begin the year, so excited to talk a little bit about the Sens.
We certainly love Sens Talk around here, I'll tell you that much, Alex. Look, we're recording this after Ottawa's massive 3-0 victory over the Seattle Kraken last night. And this brings me to my first point. Ottawa this year is 5-1-0 at home. Fantastic record, very, very good. But on the road, they're 1-4-0. Now, obviously, this is a massive concern. Ottawa last year literally only pulled a few points on the road. A big reason why Ottawa missed the playoffs last year in particular is because of their road record. Why do you think that is? This team plays, and look, I'll say this year, at least on the road, they look far better. They're in those games at least. But you mentioned it in an article you wrote for Sportsnet the other day, where Ottawa, they play well, but just like last year, at the end of those games, they can't hold on. In Ottawa, they can do it. On the road, they can't. Why do you think that's the case?
It is a young team, and Travis Green even yesterday talked about how like Brady Tkachuk, Tim Stützle are learning how to win, right? And I think it's a bit easier when you have, the Sens fans behind you. You have the last change, the matchups work. And I think, for example, in a game like against Colorado, right? They were really hanging on to that game. They really didn't deserve to be in the game, but they battled back, they got into it, and they just kind of fell apart because, Nathan MacKinnon's running at you full steam ahead, right? So I think obviously if you look around the league, most teams, even the best teams in the league, they're a bit worse on the road. And then you bring into the fact that, in the past couple of years, your centers are all Tim Stützle is what, 22 now, but he was 21, 20. Ridley Gregg, Shane Pinto, they're all under the age of 22, 23. So I think with that in mind, with this team, I think some of it is just kind of learning the tricks of the trade. And also, to be fair, outside of the game against the Montreal Canadiens, and obviously Colorado that we just mentioned, they should have beat New York. They were by far the better team.
Oh, yeah.
Against Vegas, they were the better team, but fell
again,
apart.
it's one of those late collapses, right? So definitely some immaturity there. But did you notice something different in those games? I'm sorry to cut you off, but in those games where they collapsed late, did you notice like a difference in the way they were collapsing?
I think, it just some of it is playing against good teams.
Yeah.
Some of it is also, for example, against Vegas, in the 5-4 goal that they won the game on in the last 2 minutes. Ridley Gregg, Vegas has just tied the game, all the momentum. They're close to getting a point, and Ridley Gregg tries to do too much, forces a shot, kind of gets in behind the Vegas net, and then there's a 3-on-2 that spurns the other way, right? So it's not like, oh my God, what are the Sens doing? They're falling apart, but it's just those little details that I think for this young team, they're kind of learning, right? Brady Tkachuk, even yesterday, I asked him after the game, I said, Tim Stützle had previously talked about just post game that, Brady made a couple clearances. He did some good defensive plays when the net was cleared in an empty net. And Brady said, I probably a couple years ago would have tried to score the empty netter, but I just made the simple play. So I think a part of that is learning. They're learning under Travis Green to make the right plays. But I don't think it's there's too much cause for concern so far. At the same time, if this becomes a trend, if they start now, they're playing a bunch of weaker teams in Buffalo, New York, Boston on the road, who's obviously been good but not so good this season. If we see those habits come up against those types of teams, then I think I'll be more worried about their late game collapses. But if it's just against the cream of the crop, sometimes that's the way hockey goes, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I also want to mention the fact that, some of those losses on the road, we're talking against Vegas, Cup champion, the Avalanche, cup champion, and of course, the other day, another cup champion we lost to. That's three cup champions, right? So it's not exactly like we're losing to the bottom teams and this is the same old Sens. But the next question kind of touches on this where we got a new coaching staff. Alfie, of course, returns,
Mhm.
Sexton returns, but you have a new coaching staff essentially there with Yao and Coach Green and whatnot. So I'm wondering, is it a coaching thing as well on the road? And if so, what have you noticed in terms of line deployments, in terms of strategy on the road from the new coaching staff compared to last year? Because again, you were in the room for both, so you're the
Mhm.
right person to ask.
I think what I've noticed a lot is with Travis Green that he has been doing, and you saw it especially in the Rangers game where he really shortened his lines, played Shabbat and Sanderson a fair bit at the end of that game against the Rangers. Against the Avalanche, the game's going poorly. He throws Nick Cousins on the top line with Kachuk and Stützle, and they get two goals quick, comes back. So I think the line deployment, he's been very open that he said, the best players will play. I'm not
Hmm.
sticking with something just cause, which I think is overall the right approach. There's obviously a balance between chemistry and trying to obviously produce at the same time and get the right players playing together. But I think he's been, for the most part, he's tapped into the right decisions. But we'll see. I think the litmus test will really be this next 5, 10 game stretch where the it's not that they're playing all bottom feeders, but they're not going up against Nathan McKinnon. They're not going up against Vegas, where those are just really good teams who have played amazing and they're really hard to stop. And you're at altitude. You get a couple bad bounces, right? Like the Sens gave up a goal and then a puck goes off Jake Sanderson to make it 2-2, and then the game's it completely flips on a switch. So I think they've been a bit unlucky, but I also think that's a bit of, the old Sens. And I think at least the messaging so far, I think has been right, where they haven't really talked about bad bounces, but they've been talking about their process, especially after the Rangers game. I really liked how Shabbat said, if we played that type of game, we're going to win a lot of games in the NHL. And it's true, right? And then the next night, maybe not so good, but they
That's
played well enough to beat the Kraken. And I think it's just about consistency, which is what they preach. But let's see if they can hold on to it. And that'll be kind of the question moving forward with this group.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, remember, and I'll get into November here and historical and the history around November and how Ottawa, let's just say, is not a friend of November. My birthday's in November. I don't mind November, but the Sens certainly mind November. But my point really is, again, with the Ottawa Senators, especially on the road, like that game against the Rangers, 9.999 out of 10 times you're winning that game, all right? And again, it's not about, the wins and losses, it's about how they're playing, right? Of course, it's about the wins or losses, but in terms of this conversation around whether or not they're the same old Sens or the new Sens, it's how they're playing, and they're playing completely different. Look, last year in a back-to-back situation after flying from New York, I don't think we see a complete effort like we did against Seattle last night. I really don't. And again, sure, the Kraken going to that game have only won one out of the last five. They should have won, but they won. So let's not, give them slack, for lack of better words, for beating a team they should have beat. They beat them, and that's something to be very happy about. And again, these upcoming games, like you mentioned, we have 12 games left in November. Literally a game every other day, essentially. You got to win these games, especially against, I don't want to throw teams out there, but like the Islanders, I mean, they're dealing with a lot of injuries right now. Philadelphia, I mean, Urson might be out for a bit. He's injured, their goaltender. So these are games Ottawa should beat. Sorry, these are games Ottawa should win in. These are teams Ottawa should beat. And again, if you're a team that has playoff expectations, then you should expect them to beat the teams that are on the outside looking in. And you should expect them to not only go toe to toe, but to dominate against teams that are in the upper echelon of the National Hockey League. And guess what? The Ottawa Senators have done that. And that is why I like bringing all that positivity, because here comes the negativity.
Mhm.
Ottawa since 2021, 2022. By the way, shout out to you, Alex, for this
Yes.
stat. Shout out to Sportsnet.ca. Ottawa since 2022 is 9-24 and 1 in November. Not good whatsoever. That is, I don't have to paint the picture for you. You don't have to be a statistician. You don't have to be a hockey fan to know that's terrible. Obviously, so far, not bad. 1-1 in the month of November. But what does Ottawa really need to do in this month to change that trend, finish the month off over 500, and break the curse, frankly?
I will say if they aren't 500 or above, and they've actually, I did on that note, they've never won more than 4 games in the month of November since 21, 22. Uh, so not the greatest time in November. And I mean, you never know. Like hockey's a weird game, but I would say there's a pathway here for this team, not just to do well in November, but to blaze through. Not the hardest schedule. You could argue that outside of maybe their loss against the Canadians, they've lost only to good teams in New Jersey, Vegas, Colorado, New York, right? Like all those teams are the upper echelon of the NHL. So yeah, there's concerns, but I think what is promising is you alluded to it a little bit with how they played against the Kraken. It's the consistency, right? Outside of, I would say, the Habs game, Colorado, and maybe even the New Jersey game, they've played pretty good hockey consistently. They've come back a couple times as well. And so I think with that in mind, let's see. But I don't think it's too much of a curse. But if we see that after November they're 3-8-1, then yeah, then that's we're going into doozy. But I don't think if you're just looking at it without the past in mind, because it is a new year, it's a
Yep.
very different team than years prior. Right? This isn't the Toronto Maple Leafs. So I do think in kind of the fullest respects that I don't think that will be an issue, but we'll see. And if anything, they have the runway to kind of completely dispel November worries for this fan base.
And again, I kind of joke with the curse, but it is there in my opinion. I mean, like you just said, they haven't won more than 4 games in November in quite some time. But again, just away from all those shenanigans, just back to the hockey. Regardless of the past, and you're right, this is a new team, literally on so many fronts in terms of on and off the ice. There's a completely new team, completely overhauled, essentially, other than like your core players. But at the same time, let's get back to the picture here. And Ottawa, they have to win. That's the very simple point of it. They have to win in this month. It's not about breaking the trend, it's about winning. Because if they don't win in this month, they're going to find themselves near the bottom of the standings yet again, and they're going to be trying to claw their way back in the final few months. And we already know how that goes. Unless Hamburglar wants to go on another run here, that's probably not going to work out too well for Ottawa. Now, look, you never know, right? I'm not saying if we don't do well in November, it's over, but it becomes very, very much more difficult to not only get into maybe sneak into one of those final divisional spots, for example. It seems like that third spot's potentially open, but even
Yep.
that wild card with, Columbus right now, they're surging, for example. There's some surprising teams. You don't want to get caught behind. I say this in all my videos. People say, oh, this is a must win. This is a must win. No, no, no. Every game is a must win because you have to only focus on what you can do. You shouldn't focus on what other teams are doing. If you're winning the games and you're winning enough of them, you're going to get in. No matter what the other teams are doing, focus on yourself. So this month, 12 games left, half on the road, half at home. I feel pretty good about those, home games. Like you said, the crowd and whatnot, young team, build off that. But on the road, that is going to be the big test. So we'll see what happens. But a big part of all of that, Alex, and again, shout out to your article for the stat. Doing some research on Alex, so happened to find an article that he posted today. Check it out, of course, with a lot of juicy stats. So we got to get into it here. That power play, big reason why Ottawa is winning so many games. In fact, as you mentioned in that article, 5 out of Ottawa's 6 wins this year have, had a power play goal as part of those wins. Ottawa's power play is red hot, third in the National Hockey League, 12 for 36. I mean, what is going on? What is happening? Why is his power play clicking so well right now?
I think it's interesting what Travis Green and you can thank Alfie as well, who's been working on the power play, is they changed a little bit of the dynamics. Obviously, in 22, 23, they had, I think it was the eighth best power play. DeBrincat was really good on it, with Giroux as well, coming in sometimes from the second unit. But I think they put Batherson on the bumper, and kind of put him more in front of the net, which has been interesting because you don't think of Drake Batherson as kind of mean and scary like maybe Brady Tkachuk is. Letting Tkachuk kind of roam free in the middle a little bit in the slot, and he scored a couple goals, especially against St. Louis, where it was one was in front and then the other one was kind of on the right circle.
Yeah.
And I think at the same time, Tim Stützle looks like 100%. He had one power play goal last year match that tally in his first game. He's been amazing. Obviously, I mean, I find it funny tweeting he's on pace for 120 points. I don't know if he'll get there, but I think getting to 100 is definitely in the realm of possibility. At the same time, you look at Jake Sanderson, I've talked to him a bunch of times how he's much stronger. He's told me he can hit a slapper 100 miles per hour now. And I think he's just offensively just a bit more poised, a little bit better on the puck. And that makes for a really good power play unit. I think what's interesting is that Josh Norris, when he was at his kind of heights, when he scored 35 goals, that one timer really hasn't been a factor as part of this power play, and they're still doing really well. I think that's something to watch with Norris as a whole, that he hasn't really taken a lot of slap shots this year, but he's played really well. He's been scoring. He still has a really good wrist shot. But overall, I think they have the talent to be a good power play, and now it's coming all together, right? You look in Toronto, they have the talent to be top five in the league, and they have the worst power play in the league. So it's not just about talent. And I think that's a credit to Alfie, to Travis Green, mixing things up and finding kind of a way for it to work. And it's they haven't been as hot of late. They haven't scored in a couple of games, but I would say even against Seattle, they were creating a bunch of chances. They just didn't capitalize, and that's what you want. It's kind of if your process is pretty consistent, generating chances, you're going to have a good power play. Even if I think at one point their shooting percentage on the power play was like 35%, that's going to come down a little bit, right? So,
Absolutely. I mean, right now it's like 1 for 3 you're shooting at right now on that power play, right? So obviously that's going to go down, but by how much? I mean, I can see it dropping by less than 10 points, but still being roughly 1 out of 4 opportunities you're going to score. The talent is there, and I think you made up a great point about Jake Sanderson. No one's really talked about Tom Shabbat, where he's playing, still a big role, but in a different style. That defensive pairing with Nick Jensen has been fantastic, and a lot of, journalists, bloggers, podcasters, YouTubers, whatever, said that, and I said it with Nick Jensen. Shabbat desperately needed his Mark Method, like Carlson had, all right? He desperately needed that guy that can, firstly, Jensen's not just a defensive guy. He can move that puck as well, but a guy that can let Shabbat be Thomas Shabbat. And then you have Jake Sanderson, the emergence of the Jake the Snake, if you will. Jake Sanderson, I mean, that talent that he's got will transcend that power play because now there's less stress on Shabbat to be the guy. So you have two power plays there, 2 units, I should say, that can score at will. And that's, I think, a big part as to why we're seeing that surge in goals. But also, it's a good point you mentioned about Josh Norris and the one-timer. And we're going to talk about him later. I have a question about him. But with Josh Norris, we're seeing him score in different ways. And I always said this with Josh Norris, where people always said he's a one-dimensional player. He only has the slap shot goal, or the one-timer goal, I should say. But that was never the case. If you look at that 35-goal season, you could watch it on YouTube, video of all his goals. Almost half of those goals, if not half, are driving to the net or getting to the net, somewhere around the net. So he's just a very smart player. That's why he got paid so much. And that's why I think that power play is going to do well, no matter if it drops a little bit. They just have a lot of talent. There's a lot of flexibility available on that power play. And again, look, if it stops doing so well, you can move around the guys. There's so much talent. You can make it work. And maybe you bring in Josh Norris and the slap shot again. I do wonder, though, with Norris and his shoulder, and this is not the question I had. I'll talk about that in a few minutes here. But with Norris and his shoulder, have you noticed, like, is that potentially why he's not doing one-timers anymore? Do you think there's a concern on straining that shoulder? What's going on around that?
like I don't want to kind of put something out there that I don't know, I mean we've asked him about it, and he doesn't want to talk about his shoulder, which is fair enough. He's had enough kind of reasons to think and ruminate about that shoulder. But I would say that in training camp, I didn't find that he seemed like he was worried or going into the boards or into hits with any sort of kind of worries about getting injured. I think he was kind of 100%. But if you just notice, he hasn't really been taking one-timers. He's taken a couple in practice, but that hasn't been really a huge thing where you notice him taking bombs all the time. So, you know, I'm not trying to say it's for sure because of the shoulder, but it's the likeliest scenario considering that before his injury, obviously that's what he was known for. But he's had a bunch of injuries to that shoulder. These things take a long time. Medicine's very good. So I think maybe let's see at the end of the year
Mhm.
how many slapshot goals does he have? Has it come back? And even then, he's still scoring. Yeah, I think he has 4 or 5 goals this year.
Yep, four.
That line has been really good, especially with Giroux, who's really just added a ton to it. So I'm not too worried about Josh Norris. Is he maybe a bit overpaid for what he's making right now? Sure, but is he vastly, is he not worth the money right now? Is it like a huge discrepancy? I wouldn't say so. He's been a really good second line center, and we'll see how kind of the rest of the season carries out for him.
Well, I agree with that. And that kind of brings me to my question about Josh Norris, where, yeah, again, I think a lot of people just kind of look at the stats and are like, that's the type of player he is. But he's really not. He's always been known as a very smart playmaker, but also a strong defensive guy as well. No one really talks about this. This is a strong defensive center. He was just never really utilized in that way. And we're starting to see that change. In the last 3 seasons, shout out to Trent Reynard, the Sens talk statistician for the stat. He averaged like 42 seconds of penalty kill time per game. This year, it's over 2 minutes. Clearly, there's a very big difference from last year to this year in Josh Norris's duties. So, again, what is value? What is worth the amount of money? Right now, we're winning, so he's worth it. Right now, he's contributing in many ways, so he's worth it. Now you can get to the semantics of a million plus too much or too little. I'm not going to get into that. I think I agree with you as well. Those are just semantics, right? We're not at the trade deadline. We're not at the offseason. That doesn't really matter right now. This is the contract we have. This is the cap space we're dealing with. And at least he's contributing, and it's not like he's some dead weight on the roster. You mentioned it. 4 goals, 8 points this year in 11 games. He's playing a very solid two-way style. And that second line there, Giroux, like you mentioned, great, add to that second line. I mean, Claude Giroux is literally like whiskey. I mean, he ages
Oh, he's
incredible, right?
Yeah, you could argue that outside of you could argue that for his impact on games this season, he's been the Senators' best player.
Mhm.
He's penalty killing, he's playing, making great defensive plays. If you look at the lines he's been on this year, he was with Timmy and Brady to begin the year.
Mhm.
They're firing on all cylinders, but the Norris and Batherson line struggles. The first game, Travis Green puts him on the second line with Norris and Batherson, who hadn't really been producing. They have now been, I think they have 22 points in the last 7 games combined, which is in my article. So he's just been, I think, unbelievable. I think they need to sign him as quickly as they can. I think he's playing just as well as he did in his first season in Ottawa. I don't think anyone last year in Ottawa played well. And I think he was part of that as well. But he's been amazing, such a force, and I think he brings that mentality that this team really needs. I always think about last
Yeah,
year. We were talking to Jacob Chikrin and just about leadership, and he said, it can't just be Giroux.
yeah.
I think this year what Steve Sayos did was he insulated Giroux. You see Nick Cousins, you have obviously Jensen, Allmark's in a sense the leader, right? They have much more. Amadio's won a cup. Perron, obviously, unfortunately away from the team, but with really sad personal matters. But does they just have a bunch of veterans to help Giroux, and I think that's as a part of why he's thriving. And I just still think about that goal he scored against Colorado. I think he made it 5-4 with like 10 seconds
Mhm.
left, and he was just so stern and determined. Like, I'm gonna get back in this game, and I'm not happy, but we're gonna like. And it's just, I think that's what this team needs, just a steady presence. And he's over a point per game player in 11 games. That's pretty damn good.
Yeah, the benchmark for this team, in my opinion, is how Claude Giroux reacts to goals. All right, if he's not reacting to goals, this team's in trouble. This guy clearly is. Look, Kachuk's the captain. No one's saying otherwise. But Claude Giroux is a first ballot Hall of Famer. Was a captain for over a decade in Philadelphia. This is a guy that clearly has not only the trust but the respect in that room, and more importantly, around the National Hockey League. So you said it yourself, but kind of on that note about Claude Giroux and how he's helping that second line. That first line. You mentioned it in your article today. Stützle and Kachuk combined for 31 points so far already in 11 games. Sure, some of those points come on the power play, but Trent Reynard, our statistician, mentioned how the two only combined for like roughly on average 7 minutes or so per game with one another. This year, it's up to roughly 17 because they're playing more consistently with one another. Thoughts on that chemistry between, frankly, two brothers, and is this just the beginning of basically the next step in these two fantastic careers?
I mean, they've grown up together, right? If you go to a Sens practice, they're always talking. They're not really giving each other shit or anything like that, but they're just always kind of in each other's ear. In the locker room, they're always chatting. And even last night, Stützle was asked about kind of the defensive play of his team, and he talked about Brady, how, he made that a really some good clearances with the empty net, as I talked about before. So there's definitely a chemistry between them. I think they're very good friends off the ice. I remember talking to Timmy about when Brady had his baby, and Brady texted him saying, Uncle Timmy with a picture of his newborn baby, right? Or so.
Yeah.
Um, they're pretty close, and I think that's translated on the ice, and they've been um, just amazing. And I find, especially with Brady, I don't feel like Brady's actually played that well, and I don't mean that he's been bad or anything like that, but I feels like he could even take it up another level, and he's still producing at an unbelievable
Yeah.
rate. So, sure, the power play might come down a little bit, but their 5-on-5 has been elevating, especially with Ridley Gregg, which I think has been really good on the right side of that line, just as a guy who can turn over pucks, play really good defensively, really smart player that can really elevate skilled players around him. And so it feels as though the Sens have two really bona fide top two lines right now. Hopefully, no injuries and they can keep it up. But it seems as though the forward depth of this group really seems to be shining. Like I know it's only been a couple games, but people on Sens Twitter, and I'm not saying that's what everything about Sens discussions is on Twitter or X, but how many people are talking about how much they miss Shane Pinto? Obviously they do, but in prior years it would be like, oh my God, Pinto's out.
It's a
Sens
disaster.
are
So,
gonna lose. It's over, right? And they have enough depth. I thought Stapchuk's been really good defensively in his couple games. The fourth line is the fourth line. We might talk about it later, but
yeah.
I think just this team's forward depth is really strong, and I think it's about the back end and the goaltending, which will really define what level this team goes to.
Absolutely. And I think, again, I said this in my analysis about the Jensen for Chychrun trade. This is a prime example of why you can't just look at the flashy stats, the flashy name, and the flashy highlights to say this team got better, this team got worse, this team won the trade, this team lost the trade. Because, yeah, I mean, in terms of empirical value, maybe Chychrun's the higher value player, but for this team, Nick Jensen is the more valuable player. You got to remember this team was very top heavy. You know this better than me, right? You were with the team every single day in that locker room. So you insulate that depth, and especially in the middle six. Unfortunately, right now Perron is gone. So that's of course a entirely more important situation for him. But when he's back, for example, with him and Amadio, Gregor, Cousins, right now Gaudette, McEwen, there's some really nice depth in that, bottom six. You also have some good call-ups like Osipchuk, like you mentioned. Stephen Halliday might get an opportunity. Cole Reinhardt's been fantastic, like 10 points in Belleville this year. So they have some depth options for the bottom six. And we might as well talk about the fourth line now. I don't think
Yeah, sure.
as Sens fans, we have seen such a dominant fourth line in years. I mean, for quite some time, we've thrown some, I don't want to say scrubs, but like just a random mismatch of
Yeah,
players and kind of just hoped it would work. It never did. This year, all of those players are new players, all right? Like these are new players that are, except McEwen, I guess, but
yeah,
McEwen was up and down, so he was a consistent player. So you have these three players that are never played with one another, and like that, instant connection, instant chemistry. McEwen had a huge game, 2 goals. Gaudette, 6 goals in his last 5 games. It's really great to see this team finally getting some depth scoring. And as you mentioned a lot on Twitter and your articles and whatnot, the Ottawa Senators 5-on-5 play has not been great. It's picked up the last few games, which
it
has
has.
shown into, their defensive stats as well. It's, Ottawa's only allowed 3 goals, I believe, in their last 3 games.
Yep.
Yes. So again, that's definitely a big part of it as well, the 5-on-5 play from all lines. You can put your fourth line out there and you don't really have to worry about them getting caved in, is my point. So that as a coach must feel great. But my point really with that is whoever is out on the ice, you have confidence in them playing. Now, same can't be said as much for the defensive pairings. I think when Zub comes back, we'll talk about the defensive pairings now. When it comes to the defensive pairings, when Zub comes back, who do you think draws out of the lineup? I think Travis Hamonic has got a lot of flack, but he had a couple of massive blocks last night in the final couple minutes before Stützle scored that goal. He's a heart and soul player. He's a veteran. They have a lot of respect for him in that room. But Clevin and JBD have looked fantastic together, and you can't look
Yeah.
away from that either. So what do they kind of do with that defensive pairing situation?
if I was Travis Green, it's an easy solution. You take out Hamonic. I think compared to last year, give credit to Hamnick. He came in really good shape. He's slimmed down a little bit to be a bit faster, I think. And I think at the beginning of the season, I thought maybe the first 5 games he played well, but now playing against the best competition in the league because he's playing alongside Jake Sanderson, he's just not at that level. You just can't play top pairing minutes, and that's not a slight to Hamonic. I would say it might be more of a discussion as to who it would be, but Clevin and JBD have been so good together, consistently out shooting teams. Obviously, they're playing against lower competition as a third pairing, but it's actually allowed, if you look at a lot of the games recently, Travis Green is running his three defense pairings pretty evenly in terms of minutes. Like last night, they were about all at,
Yeah,
depending, on penalty kills and stuff, but it was pretty even. And I think that's the benefit. And I think if you look at Tyler Clevin, who had a pretty I wouldn't say a great training camp, and
yeah, no,
Travis Green actually alluded to that, but he's seen the improvements, especially on the puck. You can see he's getting much more confident. JBD is always a very smart player, and I think I know JBD pretty well on the team. Very good guy, but he
okay.
talked about to me how he's tried to take a bit more of like an offensive responsibility, just in terms of not just making a good play, but carrying the puck, taking a couple risks because in this league now, as a defenseman, you have to be a puck mover if you're not huge, right? Um, and so I think when you have a pairing that's playing great in sheltered minutes, I don't know why you'd break that up. We'll see. Maybe he goes back to Hamonic and Clevin, but they were not good together
No,
to begin the season. So I think it's obvious. But I mean, and Travis Green, I asked him about kind of that pairing, and he t of Sanderson and Hamonic, and he said, we like Zub on that pairing, so I just seems like it makes sense for a like to like switch with Zub for Hamnick.
yeah, and I completely agree with that analysis, particularly because, and I think it's a great point mentioning the even disparity, or not exactly even, but the look, the third pairing isn't playing like 9, 10 minutes. Clevin, for example, is averaging just under 16 minutes this year of ice time. Every line or every pairing, I should say, is playing a pretty good amount of games. So, again, that shows that the coach has confidence, particularly in those bottom two pairings. And Sanderson's going to be Jake Sanderson, so you don't really got to worry about him. Obviously, I do agree that Hamnick should draw out. But again, I think, early on in the year, especially in preseason, Clevin did not have a good preseason. Some people thought he was getting rushed. And Jacob Bernard Docker, when I had him on the show, I mean, I spoke to him about how, the shot blocking and that physical side of his game has really propelled him into,
Yeah.
the conversation of being a depth NHL everyday guy. But you're right, that offensive ability that he brings to the game as well is also something that he's a good two-way defenseman. He mentioned that as well. He said, "Yeah, I'm always been a physical guy, shot blocking guy, but I'm also a guy that likes to move the puck. I'm a guy that likes to create offense." Remember, this is kind of an obscure stat from the right side of the blue line. He led
Yes, I
NHL in
remember.
goals, right? So we got to remember that about the boy JBD. So,
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
I remember telling him that stat, and he's like, "That's crazy." Like I told him that last year when he had was it 2 or 3 goals from that right
Yeah, it
side?
was
Yeah,
three, I believe, or
3, I
something.
think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
four, and then three of them were from there.
And
Yeah,
even if you look at the game against Kraken, had a bunch of times came up into the play, made passes, generated good chances, and then he got on the Kachuk goal. He was the one who made a really nice, like, kind of wrist shot, but into bodies, into Kachuk, who was able to tip it past Grubauer. So I think he's been a really good player, and it's good to see because honestly, heading into this season, my biggest area of concern was their
completely.
defense, specifically their third pairing,
Yeah,
right? And
100%.
you're like, oh my God, it's Clevin who's played what 8 NHL games before this season. JBD had a decent season last year, but I wouldn't have said he cemented himself as an NHLer through and through, and he wasn't playing opening night, which kind of indicates that, right?
Mhm.
And they've been really, really good together. I think the cause for concern is that in Belleville, there's not really a player that would come up, especially if Clevin were to get injured on the left side. So it's still early days, but I think if you're looking at this decor from the beginning of the season to now, you'd be like, okay, this is pretty optimistic. There's a lot of very good signs that you're seeing with this team.
Well, the Ottawa Senators famously over the last few years, as you know, have been forced to dress defensemen on those pairings that you really wouldn't want to. This year, you can't say the same. They have options. And that's not something you could have said for Ottawa for quite some time. And about Belleville, I mean, Madden Paulo and Sabrango, these and Donovan, and there's a couple other guys, Gannett, I'm not mentioning as well. There's a few guys there. But of course, they're not going to be able to replace a Clevin or whatever. But again, in a stopgap, you have such good talent there with Sanderson and Shabbat, Jensen and Zub in that top four that for a few games, you should be okay, which is not something you could have said for some time for Ottawa. Now, just on the note of 5-on-5, talk to us a bit about the impact of 5-on-5 play in terms of the defensive side of the game, because obviously we know 5-on-5, yeah, you can't score all your goals on the power play. We all know that. But in terms of the defensive side of the game, how important is it to play a strong 5-on-5 game and really be strong defensively? And I think we've seen a big difference this year compared to last year in 5-on-5 defensive play.
I mean, the majority of the game's 5-on-5, so obviously if you're playing well, but I think that the good sign is that now after a couple of really good games against New York, even though they lost, St. Louis, Seattle, they're in essentially the top half of the league in terms of expected goals. Corsi, they're out shooting opponents at 5-on-5. There is a bit of a worry where it seems as though they're not getting as many good high end or high danger chances compared. They've been lacking. They've been at the bottom of the league at that in terms of the ratio between the good chances they get and opponents. But outside of that, I think the 5-on-5 play is really promising. And we've kind of talked about like the forward depth. If you have four lines that you can run out against anyone, I still think about against Tampa Bay where McEwen and Gaudette and Cousins were hemming in Kucherov for one shift, right? Like I don't remember that in Ottawa where you'd see the fourth line without kind of danger signs running through your head. So overall, you have that. You have Jake Sanderson playing really well. Jensen and Shabbat have really grown into themselves after pretty worrying first couple games, and they've just been glowing since. So if your team's playing well and your lines are connecting, you're going to have good 5-on-5 play and you're going to win. I think the next step is kind of what we talked about at the beginning is converting good games into points against the Rangers, against Vegas, against Colorado. Like you could argue this team should be, you could say 8-4-1,
Yeah, their record doesn't show for how good they are, no doubt.
right?
No doubt.
And
No doubt.
and they were 8-3-1, I guess. I don't know. I'm trying to do the math in my head, but they could easily have a much better record if they can just hold down and find ways to
For sure.
get points. And I think that's the next step for this group is winning games consistently and finding ways to get points. When you're tied 3-3 late in the third period, you get it to overtime. You don't give up a late goal. That's that next step.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mentioned that because in our analysis of October this year to October last year, 5-on-5 expected goals was 10 at last year, top 10. This year, 27th in the National Hockey League. So, the last few games, that's why I asked you. The last few games have certainly improved. And we've seen that because they're still scoring, but they're scoring less on the power play. So we're starting to see that kind of even out. But that is something to absolutely keep in mind. A question for you, of course, about goaltending. Anton Forsberg coming off that shutout last night to Seattle. Him and Allmark have been, look, rough start to the year. Allmark, that game against the Canadians, that got hurt. Forsberg, of course, struggled at the beginning a little bit, but has really bounced back in a massive way. Ottawa's goaltending right now is ranked 13th in the National Hockey League for save percentage. Both of these two goalies have a save percentage above 900. What are your thoughts on the tandem so far?
Yeah, I think you said it perfectly. It was not the most convincing start outside of the great start for Allmark in the first game. Obviously got injured against Montreal. Forsberg gave up 3 goals on his first 9 shots. It felt as though the sky was turning, especially after, and it's like, here we go again after that 8-7 win against LA. But really, since the goaltending's been pretty good, and I think it's a chicken and the egg problem, right? Their defense, they've been playing good defensive hockey for the most part. That makes your goalies look much better. And that's what Forsberg talked about was like team last night in his shutout did a really good job of opening up lanes for him to see the puck, not really allowing too many kind of if he made a stop, clearing the rebound, right? And so you have good goaltending and good defense, you're gonna kind of go up the standings in terms of save percentage, goals against, everything. And I think if they keep playing the way they're playing consistently, which again, I think that's the word in Ottawa,
Consistent. Yeah.
consistency, right? We've had there's been stretches with this core where they beat one of the best teams in the league, and you're like, oh my God, where has this been the whole time? And this year it feels as though they're consistently playing at a level, and now it's just time for that to keep pace, and that goes for goaltending, right?
Yeah.
The
Absolutely.
goaltenders need to keep playing well, but you wouldn't say that the Sens are 6-5 and the goaltending's been elite and keeping them in a bunch of games, but it's been good enough. And that's really what this team has been begging for years. I think Allmark is ready I think what's going to be interesting is how Travis Green deploys his goaltending
Yeah.
moving forward. Forsberg has two shutouts in his last three starts. Allmark obviously looked much better against the Rangers. Um, but who's going to be given the mantle moving forward? Is it going to be a full tandem like we saw in Boston for Allmark, or is he going to get more of the rope? I think that's kind of the next question for in net.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see who they go with on Tuesday against Buffalo. Either choice makes sense, but obviously, in my opinion, you should play the goaltender that you just paid over $8 million. But again, if you start Forsberg, I don't think anyone would really be up in arms about it. Two shutouts the last three starts, very justifiable as well. A question for you. Obviously, when David Perron, Artem Zub, and Shane Pinto return, somebody has to go. You can't have all these guys. Who's that guy going?
I think we already talked about it on defense. I think Hamonic's it. I
No,
think
no,
you
I
have,
mean like sent down. Like you
oh,
can't have all these
yeah.
forwards, you know.
Um,
So who gets sent down? Sorry for the confusion.
Well, I think a stab check for sure. I think it'll be exactly the what we saw before. I think what will be interesting will be Noah Gregor that finds himself out of a lineup or out of a spot. I think he's played well for the most part, but why would you break up that fourth line? But that's the thing. Good teams, like if you look around the league, Florida last year, like Nick Cousins wasn't playing games regularly, and it wasn't because he sucked, it was because Florida was one of the deepest teams in the league. So I think that's something that this team is gonna, and maybe fans are gonna have to start getting used to. Like, oh my God, we're scratching a player that is actually pretty good,
Yeah,
and
good problem to have, right?
yeah, like I'm in Winnipeg. I have a lot of family, and my cousin works for the team. And Cole Perfetti was getting scratched out of games last year, but the Jets were a good team. I don't know if that was the right decision, but those are the decisions you have to make when you have a good team and when things are rolling. So it's good problems to have. I think Ostapchuk will be sent down, even though he's played pretty well,
Hmm.
but that's a good sign. I think he's looked not out of step, and there's going to be injuries, and he's going to come up eventually. I do think he'll be with this team for a while. I don't think Pinto's going to be back soon. I don't know if it's like long term, but I don't think he's coming back next week.
No, at least a couple
Um,
more weeks, I would imagine.
yeah. So, good time for a staff check to see where he's at, and then with Perron, hopefully everything goes well there, and he's back soon, and then we'll see. But I don't think it's kind of like there's not really a right answer. It's just who's going to be going, and Travis Green's talked about it, rewarding the players that are playing well, and then you have tough decisions, but they're the good kind.
Yeah, exactly. Now that's enough Sens talk. Not for us. We're gonna stay here for. Oh, you froze. You're back. Okay, good, good. I was a little confused for a sec. I thought I was seeing things. So we're not gonna stop Sens talk, but I want to talk about you, Alex.
No.
You know, if you're still with us there. There we go.
Yep.
All right, you're back. Beautiful. Okay, so I want to talk about your career for the final like 10 minutes or so of this interview. I know you got something coming up very soon. So I want to ask you, talk to us about your career journey. And I'll tie it into a second question because talk to us about your career journey and then give us some advice because you've had not an unconventional, but a unique pathway to where you're at now. You've been in not only independent media, and you still do your great podcast, by the way, Behind the Play. Check it out. But also you're in legacy media with Sportsnet. So kind of talk to us about that journey and some advice you have for young journalists, young content creators who are trying to enter the industry.
Yeah, my pathway is very long and I'm not going to bore people too much, but I think that basically it started out, I started podcasting. I got the itch and I flooded people in the industry about coming on my show. And I got a lot of no's or a lot of like no answers, but I just kept trying. And eventually got some people I would have never expected to come on my show, like Ron McClain, James Duthie, etc., David Amber, Ian Mendez, and then I kind of had the itch. I went into basketball, covered the Canadian team, had an amazing experience, but I kind of made that. I There was no position. I just kind of was like, I want to do this. I have some time on my hands, and that's the kind of unfortunate thing is that in this industry, as you know, Brandon, there's not a lot of jobs, there's not a lot of opportunities,
Got to
and
make
so
your own way.
you have to make your own way.
Yeah.
And I think the way I think about it is like, do you enjoy what you do?
Yeah,
And this
absolutely.
is
I don't
your hobby. If it's
know.
your hobby and you love it, and there's some way that you can make it into somewhat of a career, go for it. Don't expect it to be a career. I did not expect myself. If you told me that I'd be working for Sportsnet a year and a half ago, in August of 2023, I'd be like, you're crazy. Covering the Sens. I'm not kidding. It's not just hyperbole. So my point being is just work hard, reach out to everyone. If you don't be afraid to make mistakes like I did yesterday at a
It
at the
happens.
game.
Yeah.
And ask people for advice. Be kind. If you're trying to get players, athletes, journalists, be very mindful of their time. Don't expect anything. Be nice to people, and just try.
Yeah.
Give it a shot. And if you love it, it's not that big a deal if it doesn't go your way. If you like to write, if you like the podcast, make a podcast. Like
Do it.
it doesn't have to be, you don't need to be breaking, and you're gonna get better with time. I'm a better podcaster now than I was 2 years ago or 3 years ago when I started. I'm a better writer now than I was 3 years ago. So don't see like Ian Mendez back in his prime at the Athletic and be like, shit, I am not there. And I'll probably never be there. But the point is that that's not the benchmark. Just get better, keep trying, and try to make your own opportunities. It's a small world
Yeah.
in the media industry, so be nice to people because if you're not, if you're a dick, it will travel as well. So
Yeah.
that's a very long story short, but just keep trying, be nice, and don't put any barriers to entry that aren't there.
Yeah,
Be
I think the biggest thing for me, anyways, because I've been doing these videos for over a decade, which
Yeah,
is, I mean, that's crazy to even think about, is have fun with it. Never lose that passion. If you lose that passion, this becomes like any other job and you're going to hate it. And this is a
yeah,
job where you cannot afford to hate what you're doing because it's like night and day, 24/7. You cannot afford to hate what you're doing in this industry. So don't lose the passion. Make sure it stays fun for you. And 100% in anything, not just this, treat people the right way.
yeah,
It's just a life lesson. You don't treat people the wrong way. Don't take advantage of people. And you do unfortunately get that, especially in this industry. You know, you have people that are just trying to use you for content or whatever. You know, that's terrible. So try to maintain proper relationships with people as well is something I would add on to what you said. It's just maintain those relationships because not only for this, just for life, that is so, so key to be successful. Now, a few rapid fire questions for you
go
from
for it.
members of the team. I asked the group chat, I'm like, we got Alex Adams coming on. We got to get some questions from you guys.
Sure.
Tyler Bouchane, who, if you're watching this,
Yeah,
you're on
he's a
set.
good friend of mine. I like
Yeah.
Tyler. Shout out to
He's,
Tyler.
yeah, shout out to Tyler and D. What a beauty. This guy is all over Twitter. He's a funny guy. He asks you what inspired you to be a sports writer.
My dad was a journalist, and it's funny. I got a text from a buddy, a really good friend of mine that known me since I was 6, and I remember getting all the paper clippings of like Christoph Schubert in like 2007,
Sick.
and reading all the bios and everything. And I wanted to be a play-by-play announcer. I really looked up to Gord Miller, who I actually has been on my show. I know him a little bit. Um,
Cool.
and I think I just always loved sports. I always knew I wasn't good enough to make it to the NHL from a pretty young age. I could not skate very well. I can skate, but not fast. And and then I just followed my nose. And I fell into it. It's a weird so my life is very weird, but I think just knowing that I always loved it and then making it into something. But I love this. I love covering the NHL. I always think about Dean Brown every time I
Yeah.
see him. He's always like, I'm like, how are you? He's like, I'm living the best life. I'm living the dream. And so I think about that a lot. Like about 10-year-old me, what would he be thinking? And he'd be over the moon. And I wouldn't say I'm always over the moon, but I'm pretty lucky and I love going to the rink every day. There's nothing better.
Well, you've earned it. You do great work. You do absolutely fantastic work, and you don't get to where you are just by luck either. You need a little bit of luck, like anything in life,
Yeah.
but you've earned
Oh,
it for sure, no doubt
got a
about it.
lot of luck. But yes, thank you.
Of course.
Yeah.
And in terms of Dean Brown, I wanted to be a commentator growing up as well. I think a lot of people in this industry are like, I want to be that guy commentating the goals, and then it just doesn't really work out. But I think that's what really, in terms of being media, really hooks you into it. Now, you mentioned you weren't exactly going to be an NHLer. You were a fine skater. But did you ever consider basketball? Because Liam McColgan asks, what is it like being the tallest guy in the locker room? I hung out with Alex at the media launch event or whatever it was, the preview event like in September. This guy
Yeah.
is massive. He looks like he could center Team Canada. You ever consider playing basketball or something? Of
I covered the Canadian basketball team, so
course.
I'm like Shea Gilgeous-Alexander's height,
Crazy.
Jamal
Yeah.
Murray's height. But a buddy of mine, just the funny story was I was covering them, and I don't know if people know Zach Edey, but he's a Canadian basketball player. He just got drafted 10th overall by the Memphis Grizzlies, and he's 7'4". And there's a picture of me interviewing him that a friend of mine took, and a buddy of mine who had never met me just from Twitter was like, "Are you tall?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I kind of am," because I wasn't that short to Zach Edey. So that's kind of the story I always talk about when people are like, is how like, wow, you're tall. I'm like, yeah, but not compared to a 7'4" person. But yeah,
When this is done, please send that to me. I got to put that on the screen
I'll
for you.
find it. I'll find it.
Yeah,
I'll find
so,
it. Yeah.
but with that, Alex, what an absolute pleasure. This was so, so very much fun.
Yeah.
Alex, let everyone know where they can read your stuff, follow you, and everything in between.
Yeah, just on Twitter. I don't call it X. That's my thing.
I'm the
But
same. I'm the same. I can't get
just
used to it.
Alex Adams BTB for behind the play with an underscore at the end. On Twitter, all my stuff, you just Google my name at Sportsnet. You can find all my articles. I'll write mostly after every game in the morning, the day after. And yeah, just if you like my stuff, feel free to reach out. Always like interacting with fans. I think my job is to be a conduit. I always think about Ian Mendes talking about like I'm kind of the middleman or the middle woman to the fan base. So I think it's always great to interact with fans. And so don't be a stranger. And thanks again, Brandon, for having me on. This was great. And hopefully, I'm just for your sake doing this for 10 years. There hasn't been a lot of playoffs. So for your sake, I hope you're like doing this into May with not prospect stuff going on. So
Yeah,
thanks again for having me on.
God bless you for saying that. Just for one last thing, I haven't done a playoff game recap since I was like a junior in high school. It's been some. I've graduated college and university since. It's been some time. So yeah, with that, Alex, always a pleasure. Thank you so very much for hopping on. We'll absolutely have you on again soon. And with that, check them out at sportsnet.ca for more. And we'll see you all soon. Go Sens go. And Alex again, thanks again.
Thank you.